Hey, what's poppin'? I wish everybody watching a great pre-Christmas time, even if you're not celebrating. And if you're watching this after Christmas, well, that sucks for you. In this video, we're gonna talk about scalable Redux infrastructure. So I'm gonna share how I set up Redux, normally in a type-safe way. So we're gonna be working with TypeScript, but you can follow along just fine in regular JavaScript. And I'm gonna be doing this in Next.js, but you can also follow along in React. Okay, Redux is really useful even for large application, or especially for large applications, to get your state management right. Let's take a look at how to set it up in a scalable and type-safe way that I personally really enjoy working with. So let's get right into it. Okay, now let's get started. So to get started, we're gonna go to the desktop, and now we're gonna say npx create next app at latest. But you can follow along just fine in only React. I'm going to use Next.js because I feel more comfortable in that. Let's call it React Redux. There we go. Yes, we want TypeScript, and hell yes, we also want ESLint. That's going to initialize our project. Very cool. Okay, and if we take a look at what we're about to install, you're probably familiar with it. It's going to be Redux, and Redux has 8.5 million weekly downloads, which is absolute insanity. And React Redux, which we're also going to use, has 6.4 million. Damn. Okay, that's insane. All right. Anyways, let's go into cd react-redux and open that with Visual Studio Code, and then we can actually get started with the setup. There we go. Okay, so let's run npx install, and then we want Redux and React Redux, and I think, yeah, we also want Redux dash, wait, is it the dash toolkit? Let's search for that. Let me get that over here. React, actually no, we want Redux toolkit npm. I think it's something with an at, right? Or is it? Redux.js/toolkit, is that it? Yes, it is. There we go. Yes, it's at Redux.js/toolkit. Why is that open? We don't want that open. There we go. And let's replace that with at Redux.js/toolkit. And then we should have everything. No, we don't. What's the... Oh, npx. Nope, we want npm install. There we go. Okay, and now that that's done, we can go into our index, which is the main page in Next.js, if you're not familiar. And in here, we can get set up with Redux. Now, what I like to do personally is create a folder. Normally, I've got a source folder. In this case, I'm just going to name it Redux. Now, in most of the Redux courses that you could take online, they will tell you, do not do this. Do not name your folders whatever technology you're using, but instead of the purpose they are serving. However, I always name my folder Redux, and I don't care. And in this Redux folder, we are gonna have our store, and const store is equal to, I think it's create store, which is something we get from, wait, is that deprecated? We reckon configure store. Oh, yeah, that's what it was. Configure store. There we go. And then here we're gonna pass reducers, and we're also gonna name them. But first, let's export that. Okay, and so let's pass the reducer, which is gonna be an object, but we don't have any reducers yet, and that's what we're gonna create next. So let's have a counter slice.ts. Now, what is this slice? Normally in Redux, you have 3 separate entities. For example, you've got the reducers, and then you've got the action creators. And Redux Toolkit is really helpful in not having to do that. So instead, what we can do in Redux Toolkit is something like slices. So let's say const counter slice, and each slice is, well, you can do whatever you want, but I recommend each slice handling one certain aspect of the state management of your application. So for example, if you had one counter, then there would be one slice to manage that counter. And if you also had, something else in the application going on, then there would be a different slice for that. And that's going to be, and I'm going to disable GitHub Copilot. not really helpful. Create slice, which is something that is not by default in here. It's weird. So let's import that. Import create slice from at redux.js/toolkit. There we go. And that receives an object. Now let's take a look at what we can pass in here. So we have the initial state, the name, and then the reducers. Let's take a look at each one. So first one is gonna be the name. Now the name is gonna be whatever will show up in the Redux dev tools. Let's name that counter, and then we're gonna pass the initial state. Now you could define it right here. What I normally do is define it up here. And you're gonna see why in a second. It's gonna be quite helpful. So for example, let's say count 0 is the initial state. We're gonna pass that. Remember, we can also do it like this, but in JS, when you've got an object and the property as the same thing, you can just pass the shorthand instead. And then we also want the reducers. That's gonna be an object. And I always have one thing in here, which is reset counter, and then you're gonna see why we have the initial state. That is gonna be a function that returns the initial state. So whenever we want to dispatch that from anywhere in the application, that is gonna reset everything, and we don't have to pass all the default values of the initial state again. And that's just really handy. And let's have as a second reducer at count, and in here we can receive two things. Now you won't see them in here, but that's going to be the state and also the action. And when we have the brackets, these are going to be inferred automatically. So as you can see, the state is getting passed in here as the first argument, and the action as the second argument. And then here we can then modify our state. So we could say state.count. So as you can see, it infers the values we have in state, which is only the count. And then we can say is equal to action.payload. There we go. So we are expecting a payload and then pass that. And this needs to be an arrow function. There we go. Insert a comma here and we're good to go. So we could now dispatch this event from our components if we added this to the store first. We can remove the unused exports, and then here for the reducer we can say counter, and then nope, that would not be counter slice, but something we get from the counter slice. So const counter reducer is equal to counter slice dot counter slice. There we go. Dot, and then you can see we have actions, case reducers, get initial state, name, and reducer. In this case, we care about the reducer, which we're going to export as a default counter reducer. And then we also want to export the actions that we have in here. So that's only going to be at count. There we go. And also reset counter, which is going to be equal to counter slice dot actions. There we go. Now that means because we're exporting the reducer, we can use it in here. So that's going to be counter reducer, and that's all we need to do. So now let me show you what happens in Photoshop. Okay, prepare for some really ugly, I guess you could call it art. So we have the component, which is in this case going to be hold up, there we go, or index page. This is going to be the component that we dispatch an event from, right? So we have the component that dispatches, let me dispatch, there we go, that dispatches an event to the store. Let me draw that to the store. So essentially what the dispatch means, we are passing data and also saying, look, this event is occurring to the store, which then updates the slice. So that would be the same first letter, but let's call it SL for slice. So we are dispatching from the component, then going to the store. So the store receives the action, says, okay, this reducer is responsible for that, the counter reducer, then goes to the slice and performs the action we have dispatched. And as the action passes the data we have passed from the component. And then from the component, we can subscribe to the store, this one right here, and then get the current data that we want. So in our little drawing, the component would dispatch to the store. Store would then update the slice with the state, update, and then the component gets the state from the slice. Because remember, the slice is keeping the state right here, and that's where the component gets it from. So component updates the store. The store looks, okay, which reducer is responsible for that? It's the reducer in here. In this case, the add count or the reset counter. These are the reducers. And then the state is kept in here, which the component can subscribe to. How can it do that? Well, with React Redux, we can have something really useful, which is called a use selector. Now, to use that effectively, though, beforehand, we want to export the type of root state, which is equal to the return type, which is something we get from return type from, I think that's built in, and we're going to pass type of store dot get state. I don't know why it, yeah, now it works. Get state, wait, is this? Well, that's weird. So what I meant is weird is that I don't get any auto completion here, but it works just fine. So we're gonna have the return type and then type of store dot get state. And actually we're gonna export the store as a default instead of doing it this way. There we go. Save that. And now we can do something really useful in our component where we want to subscribe to. So to subscribe to our Redux state, so in this case, to this slice right here, we're going to use the use selector. The use selector receives a state. Now the problem is the, let's just return the state. The type of the state is unknown, which is really inconvenient. So if we try to access our counter property in here via a dot, we don't get any type safety from it at all. And that is why we returned the root state type right here. So we can say the type of this is root state. And the root state knows all of our slices, which is something really useful about working with TypeScript and Redux. So now we can say dot, and we see dot counter, dot count, for example. What I usually do is destructure that, but if you have a lot of properties, be careful with destructuring, because if you don't destructure them, then the performance will be better in large slices. Because not all of them get actually imported to the component, whereas with destructuring, they will be. Okay, and now that we've got the count, we can make a very simple application. So let's have just a, damn, there's a lot of stuff in here. Let's just have a p tag, your count. It's gonna be count. There we go, and then a button that is of type button that says increase count. Okay, now the button won't do anything yet, but let's start up the application. Let's go into Firefox and then localhost 3000. There we go. And could not find React Redux context value. Please ensure the component is wrapped in a provider. Good point. That's what we didn't do. So let's go into our app, or if you're following along in Next.js 13, that would be the root layout component, or if you're following along in React, that would be your main component as well. Okay, and here we're gonna pass the, how is it called? Let's name it Redux Provider. There we go, and then also close that off. Redux Provider, and that is something we get from React Redux. That's why we have this application installed, and we are going to name this as Redux Provider. There we go. And this provider is going to have the store, which is going to be equal to the store that we're going to import from our store right here. We exported it as a default, and that's why we can import it here. And now let's retry that. Let's reload the page. There we go. This looks horrible, but we can say increase count and nothing happens yet. If we go to Chrome, and then let me open that on the left here, go to localhost 3000, because I do have the Redux DevTools in Chrome, which is going to be more helpful. So let's go to Redux, and if we click, wait, let me go out of this, increase count. Okay, so nothing happens. This counter is not getting updated and the increased count doesn't work. Let's take a look at why that is. And the reason is quite simple, and that is because we are never dispatching an action. And dispatching just means we are telling Redux, look, this action just happened, go to the corresponding reducer and do whatever we've defined in here. So that would be update the state. Okay, so let's do that. Const dispatch is equal to, and we get a hook for that, which is called use dispatch from React Redux. Super useful hook. That we can then use, for example, in the button, or we could just have it as a function right here. Const on click. It's going to be an arrow function. And then here we're going to say dispatch. Now what are we going to dispatch? We're going to dispatch this action right here, add count. So we're going to say add count. We can import that because we exported it down here as the counter slice.actions. We're going to dispatch add count. That's all we need to do, because this add count doesn't expect anything as the action, for example, a string or whatever. We don't need to pass anything here. And now we can simply pass that to the button. So on click, which is going to be on click. Now in a larger component, you would probably be more verbose on the naming for this function right here. I can make the code a bit larger, by the way, because on click is not a good name, but because this component is so small, it doesn't really matter. So we can restart that, and let's take a look at that in Chrome though. Cannot use import statement outside of a module. Okay, what did I do? And that might be because this is not gonna come from there, but from React Redux instead. Let's take a look if that fixed the problem, and yes it did. Okay, so when we increase the count now, we can still see nothing happens. That's awkward. Okay, why is nothing happening on click? Let's actually, no, let's not do that. I think it might be because we did invoke this, and what is it expecting though? It's not expecting anything. So how about we remove the action, because we don't really care, and we're gonna say count plus one, state.count, count plus one, because we don't need an input for this. We just want to add count. Now we could have something like a number to increment by. That would be useful. In this case, we don't want anything for now though. So let's restart the page, and now it works. So as you can see here on the right hand side, with every click, we are dispatching an action to Redux, and we can see exactly what is happening over here in the Redux panel. So we can see the original state. And I'm at the difference tab, so we can see only the difference. So if this was a large state, only the state that would change would be shown here. We could also show the entire Redux state. Now that's only this thing, but in large applications that would be different. And also the action that was dispatched from our component. And this works just fine. Now if you wanted to pass data in here, as I mentioned just a second ago, we could have something like an action in here. And the action type would be of payload action, which is, it's so weird that I'm not getting any auto imports here. That's very weird. But we are expecting a number in here, just to make this very type safe. So we are expecting a number that will throw an error here because we're not passing a number. And then we can say state.count is equal to action dot payload. So if we wanted to add 5, for example, we could just type that out here on the front end, and then that would be increased by 5 with every button click. No, it's not doing that. Interesting. Did I mess something up in here? State.count is equal to action.payload. Well, yeah, okay, because we're just setting it to 5 each time. So we want to say state.count plus action.payload. And because we're using Redux Toolkit, this is so handy, we can actually mutate the state directly. And if we were just using Redux, which is not even advised by Redux when using React, we'd have to do all this immutable stuff, which is quite annoying. So, but because we can mutate directly, we can just increment that by 5 and mutate the state directly like this. So state.count is equal to state.count plus this and that. That is called a mutation. And we are totally allowed to do that, and then see all the actions we are dispatching here from the front end. Now this architecture, which I've shown you, I've set it up in an empty project, but I also use this in one of the largest projects I've done, or in one of the larger ones for sure, which is Wordful, the startup we are building together. Well, not that much anymore, but it's an AI startup pretty much that hasn't gone to beta yet, but I also use Redux in this. So if you take a look at the store, it's a bit larger. And just to show you that the infrastructure I've shown you right here with React Redux, it's in small scale here, but it does scale well, and Redux can handle the scaling aspect of it. So I think it's a great way to use Redux, really scalable in a type-safe way, which makes working with Redux so much easier. And yeah, I think if you're going to use Redux for your larger scale applications, this is probably the way to go, or at least the way that I advise you take. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I wish you a lot of fun building big applications with Redux, because you don't really need it in small ones anyways. With that said, thank you for watching, have a good one, see you in the next video, and bye bye.